Good morning, Chairman Anderson, honorable board members, Steve Monahan, your Director of Information and General Services. Very excited to bring this project to you this morning. Speaking this morning will be David Jones, analyst with the CEO's office and the Office of Emergency Services, and from CAL FIRE, Chief Jim Mathias and Forester Steve Garcia, who are critical partners, as well as Jamie Jones, the Executive Director for the Fire Safe Council, all valued partners in making this project happen this morning. Next slide. So background, of course, is your board's a priority in wildfire safety for our community. I won't go in, maybe Chief Mathias will, on the criticality of this project in our current wildfire state in the state of California and specifically Nevada County. Needless to say, this project is right in alignment with your A priority. Background, back in December 2018, CAL FIRE came out with a grant program. This is when the governor put in his budget $250 million per year for 5 years as a commitment to address wildfire risk across the state of California. At that time, in December, the county submitted a grant for the Ponderosa West Grass Valley Defense Zone project, and Mr. Jones here will go through the project in a moment, explaining what that is. We applied for that grant, and then we were awarded the grant, and that's what we're going to present to you this morning. The first item on your resolutions is a proclamation, emergency proclamation for this project, declaring an emergency in Nevada County due to extreme wildfire severity. And this follows along with what the governor did for the state of California on March 22nd, where they issued a proclamation of state of emergency due to the vast tree die-off throughout the state, resulting in increased risk of wildfire. What this does for us for this project is it lets us streamline some of our governmental procurement and purchasing. The other hats I wear for you is the Director of Emergency Services and your purchasing agent. So what this will proclamation do is give the authority to me to do some expedited purchasing. We need to hire a biologist, we need to hire a forester to do some of the environmental work to move this project forward. This proclamation will give me the authority up to $100,000 to do that without bringing those contracts to your board, and that'll help streamline this and as needs arise throughout this project. The first phase of the project is on a very aggressive timeline due by December 31st, and Mr. Jones will explain that, but that's one of the reasons why we want this proclamation. So, Mr. Chairman, what I'd like to do is go through the presentation so we give the context of why we want this emergency declaration with the project details, and then come back through and approve the resolutions if that is okay with you.
So to clarify, we're doing a presentation on all 3 items and then doing a vote on each one of those items after the presentation.
Yes, sir.
Much like the prior set of agenda items. Very good.
Yes, sir. Okay, so with that, I would give it over to Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Steve. The objective of the Ponderosa West Grass Valley Defense Zone project is to implement a shaded fuel break, thus protecting homes, roads, by thinning trees, shrubs, brush, and other vegetative growth. In total, the project will treat approximately 1,200 acres. Ponderosa project item SR 190646 refers to a priority project that's 300 acres within the 1,200 acre project area of the Ponderosa West Grass Valley Defense Zone project. This is pursuant to Governor Newsom's March 2019 proclamation of a state of emergency, and allows for some CEQA exemptions. The 300 acre priority project is estimated to be complete at $1 million with no matching fund requirements. SR 190651 refers to the remaining 900 acres regarding the Ponderosa West Grass Valley Defense Zone project. This project involves a full environmental impact on the remaining 900 acres within the project footprint. This is estimated to be completed at $2.5 million with a $30,000 matching requirement. SR 190652 refers to proclaiming a local emergency, which Steve briefly touched on, due to dangerous fire risks within the Ponderosa Grass Valley defense zone. Once again, this authorizes the Director of Emergency Services as the authorized project representative and waives regulations to reduce delays and expedite fuel reduction efforts within the project area during the local emergency. Here you'll see attached project map. You can tell that from the map, project runs north of McCourtney Road and south of Rough and Ready Highway, and it will effectively help the communities of Lake Wildwood, Penn Valley, and Rough and Ready to the west, as well as the city of Grass Valley to the east. At this point, I'd like to turn this over to CAL FIRE. Representatives Jen Mathias and Steve Garcia.
Well, you can see the map is skewed a little bit, and actually the project is oriented north and south. And the reason why this location was selected was back in December when the unit was asked to provide priority projects, we looked at the CWPP for the County of Nevada, and this was identified as the #1 priority project for the County of Nevada. So the project was added to a list of 3. The 3 projects that were identified, two of which were in Placer and one was in Nevada, yielded approximately $2.3 million of direct funding from it's actually the California Carbon Investment Fund, so they're greenhouse gas, CCI funds, forest health type funds. So we were able to get 2 of those projects approved, 2 of the 3, which I think is pretty good odds. And the idea was that the unit would reach out to some local cooperators, enter into agreements, and have the local entities implement the projects. To accompany the projects, there was a series of environmental restrictions that were lifted or suspended. So there are some CEQA suspensions in place. And there's an entire packet of, I don't know, approximately 30 pages specific to the Ponderosa West project that outlines all the restrictions and how one would comply with the project. In our fire environment, one of the primary risks is when a fire is moving with slope or wind. And our predominant winds on a typical fire day are out of the southwest towards the northeast. And you can see if the map were oriented more to the north, you would see that a fire that originates in McCourtney Road area or on the federal lands, which are kind of to the south and west of this area, a fire that would start there on one of those predominant fire days would spread to the northeast, northerly to the northeast. And you can see with proper orientation how a fire that originates there would move towards the heavily populated area along the 49 corridor. So the alignment of that fuel break, which was developed by I think the county OES and the Fire Safe Council over time, is actually a very good orientation. There's also a very distinct dividing line between vegetation types where you're coming out of the grass, more oak woodland grass dominated fuel types into a chaparral and then up into a timber component that occurs essentially right along that dividing line. So with fire history, with the terrain, the slopes, and the fuel types, it's a very logical location for this project. And so there are 2 components to this, and the unfortunate part here is really that we're trying to deal with too much money in too short a time frame. And there was a grant that was proposed at the same exact time that the governor asked for the priority projects. And so simultaneously, these two projects were presented as priorities from two perspectives, really, from the grant perspective as well as from the priority project perspective. And they were both seen as critical. And so there was this, this division, I guess, of idea that a priority project should have CEQA suspension and be put in place to allow immediate work to occur, and that the grant should be funded to allow more long-term work to occur. And so now we're faced with this concept that we have a small portion, which is approximately 300 acres, and the only clarification to that I'll provide is that the CEQA suspension actually applies to 400 acres. The contract would specifically cover 300 acres. I think that there's a point there to negotiate exactly how many acres we accomplish. But we have up to 400. The contract addresses 300. That's the first part. The second part is the grant, which is supposed to cover the rest. Now you can see there's a red boundary on this map. That red boundary is approximately 1,200 acres. And there is no delineation on the map of which acreage is where. Where's the grant? Where's the priority project, right? So that's I think, been a small point of confusion, but the reason why it's not identified is that with all of these projects that are occurring on primarily private land, you know, each landowner is the king of their domain, and they decide what they would like to have done on their property at what time and what location, right? And so it's difficult to determine where will we start, because you have to have the landowners identify where we will start. And the outreach for those landowners is contingent on having a contract that allows the Fire Safe Council, in this case, to go out and do that outreach. And so rather than strictly identify, here are the 300 acres or 400 acres that applies for the priority project, it made more sense to leave it as a broader project, get the project started, do the outreach, and then use that as your guide for where you will actually implement. There are also, as I'm sure everybody is very well aware, there are very critical species here, federally and state listed plants that need to be addressed. And there may be a benefit in you know, not working in an area for resource protection, or actually going into an area for resource benefit or enhancement. And so rather than try and pin down exactly where the priority project applies, it makes more sense to keep it broad, do the outreach, and use the landowners as your guide as to where you're going to start. So, I mean, all I can say is I encourage the county to take the challenge on. I have every confidence in the world that your county staff and the Fire Safe Council, as well as all the cooperators and contractors that might be involved, have the ability to implement this project in the timelines that are necessary. And I think it's a great project, so I encourage everybody to consider it thoughtfully and hopefully support the project.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Steve?
Chief Matthias, any comments?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit on to what Steve said. I'm the operations chief, which means that when there's a big fire, that's what I'm supposed to be in charge of. So let me just break it down pretty simply for you, and why this is very valuable and why it's so critical, and why I like the way that you're approaching this with the word emergency, because it's not an emergency until we have to deal with it immediately, right? And that's where we're at. We have to be as prepared as possible. Chief Garcia mentioned the north to south orientation. So if we were to turn this map on its side, and then he talked about the winds that normally come, if it was top to bottom on the page, you would see Grass Valley would be on the right-hand side of the page, and the winds would be coming from the left. So what we have to do is we have to create an area of reduced fuels. So we have to balance that with what he talked about, the critical plants and environment, with our needs to protect the city of Grass Valley and those communities that surround it. So we go from that grass model where a fire could start down in the valley, Penn Valley area in the lower grasslands, and be pushed rapidly up towards the city of Grass Valley. And this isn't the end all says all. If it's a small fire, we as your fire department and our local government partners can go out and attack the fire and put it out pretty rapidly for the most part. but this gives us an advantage. It gives us a place where we can stop by reducing the fuels. It's kind of like taking some paper away from a fire that's burning along. We just remove the fuel out of the way, and that's what this project's supposed to do. So we're trying to balance that out. So that's the operational why we need to do it real quickly. It gives us a chance to stop the fire before it gets to the city of Grass Valley if it's not just a small fire. If it's a large, damaging, rapidly evolving fire, it gives us a place to get a foothold and stop the fire. It's very critical. It needs to get done. So in addition to that, being operations chief, I'm also in charge of our Washington Ridge camp, who will help you supply labor to do this project at a very economical rate. And I will tell you, this is a priority project. So as soon as we're ready to start this work, we stand ready to commit to you at least one crew a day, as long as they are not out dealing with fire emergencies. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Chief Messias, and thank you again, Chief Garcia.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I'd like to invite Jamie Jones up. And Jamie, again, is the Executive Director for the Fire Safe Council and our key partner who, looking at the structure of this project, CAL FIRE is contracting with the County of Nevada to do this project, and the County of Nevada will be subcontracting with the Fire Safe Council to do the boots on the ground implementation. So Jamie.
Good morning, supervisors. So the Fire Safe Council in Nevada County is eager to get the project started with you guys and help collaborate with our partners at CAL FIRE. And amongst the other things, we're eager to get the outreach and education portion started amongst the community. So there are a lot of landowners in that project footprint that we will be reaching out to and educating. I think it's important to note that this is a shaded fuel break or a project or a fuel modification zone. We are not clearing people's lands. There are some detailed information or detailed guidelines that we'll be following that are in the contract. And Chief Garcia was probably more qualified to speak to what that fuel modification zone will look like. However, as you know, moving forward, I think we want to be very sensitive to the ecological concerns in the area, even with the CEQA exemption. So we will be having some events moving forward to educate the community and answer questions as they arise. So.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Steve?
Chairman, that would be the conclusion of our presentation, and happy to answer any questions that you or the board may have.
Dan, this is your district.
Mine and Sue's.
And Sue's.
On the orientation of the area, which way were the prevailing winds going to be coming, Steve?
Southwest generally
So up that way.
On a what I'll call a large or typical fire day. Without getting all wonky about fire behavior, we definitely see an increased probability of large damaging fires when certain weather conditions are in place. We are seeing more of a northerly and easterly wind pattern causing damaging fires at a certain time of the year that's kind of derived around timing of precipitation or drought. But the typical historical direction for damaging fires is a southerly, southwesterly type flow in orientation with topography.
Okay, that answers my question, because I thought the orientation or the area of work would be more up just beyond Rough and Ready Highway, down in the watershed. What's the name of that creek that goes through Nevada City?
Deer Creek.
Yeah, Deer Creek. The Deer Creek watershed. But if the wind is from the southwest, it makes more sense. Also, private property owners. You're going to have to get permission from each property owner to go on their property, and then they're going to direct you on what they want done, rather than professionally what should be done?
Well, so that's a great question, and the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. And we've been implementing a priority project over outside of Colfax now for several months. And it's always a challenge when you go onto a landowner's property that really probably doesn't really know what is the right thing to do. They know what they don't want it to look like. And when you can show them, this is the post-treatment condition, 9 times out of 10, they think, this is exactly what I want on my property. And then you can go in and it gives you the latitude to do what you need to do. We will use professional foresters and technicians, as well as people that have the fire knowledge and understanding of fuels reduction in order to implement the project from the initial identifying resources to protect all the way through the quote-unquote completion on that property, and put it in a condition that it's going to be fire safe on that, when they conclude the work. If a landowner has some special requests for the retention of vegetation, we design the project around what their needs are. And RPF is obligated to essentially to advise or represent the landowner, and so they're gonna be obligated to do that. One of the benefits of having a very wide project area is that it allows you to move across the landscape and have some flexibility. And if you have a landowner that's very hesitant to participate, your project doesn't just stop because you hit a property line. You can, in most cases, you can move around them, so to speak, right? That's just creating this mosaic out there on the landscape. There's still a fuel modification going on. There's still fuels reduction going on. Even if there is a property that's a holdout and they don't want to participate, you can go work around them. But over time, my experience is that once they see what it actually looks like, now those folks that are hesitant, they say, well, I actually do want that on my property. It just takes a little education and time and understanding, and then people typically come on board.
There's one neighborhood just off of Squirrel Creek Road that did a fuel modification project, and that to me is pretty much a model. And right across the fence line is a non-fuel modification that is just completely overgrown with vegetation. So, it would be nice to be able to show them the difference between that and whatever. The 300 acres or the 400 acres. Are you going to, how do I say this, go to different property owners, get their permission, and add up that acreage until you hit 300 acres? You know what I mean, Jim? You're just going to be jumping around trying to meet that $1 million grant?
That's I think the only way. That's the only way, is to find the landowners that are on board and use those. I mean, when I'm trying to break apart one of these massive projects, I always try to establish some anchors along that fuel break, and kind of like they built the railway over the Sierra Nevada. They just started punching holes down through the granite and then started tunneling each way, because then they could work from different faces and extend their tunnels, right? Same thing. You start in a spot and you work out from there. You start in another spot, you work out from there, and eventually you connect those dots. And those spots are going to end up being the landowners that are on board with the project and want to get it done as soon as possible. This first phase is an urgency type project. It has to happen quickly. You hope that you get the landowners on board quickly, and then you can start the work quickly, and then you proceed with the project. And when you hit that target dollar figure, then that's going to dictate where you stop.
Yeah.
But a 20-acre landowner isn't necessarily 20 acres of treatment. You may have an area that's just topography or access or whatever the conditions are dictate that you go around 5 acres. So there is going to be a process of getting the landowners on board, establishing what you can do on the land, and then installing the treatment until you essentially run out of money. But you also have this grant for the same general vicinity, and in my twisted mind of how these things come together, you have this process of CEQA compliance for a grant that can be ongoing while you're installing the first phase, and you're essentially just jumping from one train onto the other train and continuing on. So those landowners that get on board at $999,000, just under $1 million, they're not going to get cut off, they're just going to roll onto a different project. It's going to be the same treatment. It's going to be, everything's the same. It's just a different fund pool.
When are you going to contact the property owners?
The goal is to contact property owners by the end of the month.
Okay. Public meeting, say out there at the church on Squirrel Creek Road, where everyone can come together. You can do presentation.
I've already had one.
Huh?
I've already had one.
Okay. How'd
Additionally,
it go?
Terrific.
Okay.
Chairman Anderson, I might add, at your next board meeting, we're going to be bringing the contract between the County of Nevada and the Fire Safe Council, and that'll be the official subcontracting contract to pay Fire Safe Council to do that work.
Thank you, Steve.
Now,
Yeah.
all I would offer is that as this project is ongoing, you know, my role as essentially the overseer of the contract and the grant is an ultimate authority for approval of the funds. I'm going to take as much of an active role as I need to, as I'm requested to. If there's a need for me to dive deep and get into project management to help Jamie or to help the county, I'm willing to do that, as well as attending whatever meetings and outreach and education. This is a collaborative project. This is not the state coming in and saying, here, we need you to do this for us. This is us doing this together. That's the way that we've implemented over in Colfax. We're at approximately, I'm going to say 15 to 18% complete on that project right now. And if we continue our progress, we're going to be able to filter some resources potentially over and assist on this project as necessary. But this is collaborative. I just really wanted to highlight that fact.
Chief Garcia, we very much appreciate that collaborative perspective, and we also very much appreciate your willingness to dive as deeply into it as you need to make sure the project is completed adequately and on time. So with that, Sue, any questions?
No, I think this is an outstanding project. I hope we can get started the sooner the better. I think that it existed at one time and it worked. That was its purpose. And it's time to get it back where it was meant to be in the first place. And CAL FIRE, and Fire Safe Council, this is tremendous partnerships that we work with that keep us safe. And I hope that people be really open to what this can look like. And it's such a positive, and then hopefully we can move on and send it down further, because it did at one time. I don't remember how far it reached, but that's where it should have gone and stayed. So I commend you all for the work that we're going to do on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Ed?
Well, I think this is great, and I commend you also, but I got to tell you, you've totally confused me. I don't understand. You don't know where this project is going to start, is what you're saying?
Yeah, so there is a red boundary on the map.
Right.
That identifies the confines of a project, which is called the Ponderosa West Defense Zone Project.
And within all
Within
that
that-
1,200 acres is the 300.
Within that 1,200-acre project, there are two fund pools. One fund pool is the immediate project, which is the governor's, executive order, and the other fund pool is the grant.
But
The first fund pool.
clarify, yeah, what is the immediate?
Yeah, the immediate fund pool is the governor providing us immediate funding and CEQA relief to immediately start doing work. It's an emergency proclamation.
Okay.
Okay. It's been limited because the concept is that an emergency in this case isn't going to extend for 4 years. It's not going to extend for 3 years. Theoretically, it was supposed to be a 1-year lifespan emergency. Well, you can't do 1,200 acres in a year. You can probably do 300 acres in a year. And so arbitrarily, I will say, we had to just say, we're going to cut it off here. This is the starting fluid in the engine, is to get this thing started. And then with this other fund pool, that's the gasoline that keeps the engine rolling for multiple years.
Okay.
There was no way to identify exactly where to do the work because it depends upon an individual landowner's willingness to participate. In order to get the landowners on board, somebody has to do the outreach, and that outreach is being funded by the fund pool. It's kind of like the chicken before the egg. where do you start? Well, we had to start somewhere, and so we just said somewhere in this zone, there's this funding and immediacy that we're going to start, and that's going to be dictated by who's on board.
So you've already had some public meetings, one anyways. So does that give you an indication as to where those points may be that you were discussing?
Well, I think that there is an indication of where on some of those projects will start, and you have a great customer out there that's the county of Nevada. The county owns land there, and we've already implemented a project going back to 2009, which was kind of it was a very special project dealing with the native plants out there.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that there's an intent to start there immediately
Okay.
until you can get other landowners on board. So, I mean,
Okay.
that's probably point one.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Schofield, if you look at the map and you look at the far right, that big parcel is the McCourtney Road transfer station, and then to the north of that would be the animal shelter where Mr. Garcia was talking about, where we did a project a number of years ago. So there's about 60 acres right now that we can get started on because we grant our permission for you guys to go out there and do that work. So we just need to get the biologists out there and do that due diligence piece, and then we can start working on that ASAP. And then strategically, in some preliminary meetings, we had talked about hitting these larger parcels, moving, right to left down that map would probably be the most time-efficient process, rather than going into the smaller parcels of the numerous individual property owners, which will be more labor intensive for the Fire Safe Council to get all those right of entries and permission slips from those folks. But again, as Mr. Garcia had mentioned, it's going to be, hitting the property owners who are eager and on board, and skipping the ones and coming back to them later in the second phase.
Thanks for the clarifications.
Steve, for the edification of the public, we have a green area, hatched area on the graphic. Could you describe what that is? And also, we have 2 purple lines and a number of black stars. Could you describe what all of those are?
The green hash marks are property owned by BLM, and the purple, I'm not quite sure what the purple is. I mean, they're just identifying the roads. Yeah.
That's French Ravine Creek.
Yeah.
Or, pardon me?
French Ravine Creek, the purple.
Okay.
So the dark purple is the road, and then that light purple, I'm assuming, is the creek.
And then the black stars, they're historical areas, that's my understanding, but let's just verify that. Okay.
I believe so.
So I thought the
Oh,
purple,
infrastructure, okay.
the purple had to do with road vegetation management, I think,
Yeah.
though, it's already in place. I think there's stuff that's already going on, like where you go out McCourtney, where we've been doing the roadside vegetation managements. So there's some of the purple, I think, didn't have to do with some projects that are already in place.
I'm not sure about that,
Okay,
Supervisor.
Okay.
Okay, and we have Heidi to ask questions now.
Thank you. Yes, I have a couple of questions on sort of the funding management piece, and then a couple of questions on the CEQA issue. So just to maybe start with the most obvious, the emergency declaration is going to apply to the $1 million that we're getting.
Supervisor, the emergency declaration will apply to this entire project.
It would, no, I understand, but the 300 acres, 300 to 400 acres are going to be CEQA exempt. And those are the ones that are part of the emergency declaration. Am I not correct about that?
Supervisor, if you're talking about the governor's emergency declaration, that's the $1 million first
Right.
phase 300.
Right.
The county declaration that we're asking you to approve today will be for the duration of this full project.
Right, so there's $1 million that's part of the emergency funding that applies to 300, 400 acres where CEQA is exempt. That funding, we don't need to do an RFP, that's going to CAL FIRE?
That funding, Supervisor, will be going to direct contracts. The county will contract with foresters or biologists as needed, and it will be going to our contract with the Fire Safe Council, who will
For
then
outreach?
Well, they'll be doing outreach, but they'll also be directly contracting with the vegetation management companies to actually come in and do the work.
Okay, so CAL FIRE is not involved with that piece of it, that $1 million piece of it?
No,
Okay.
no
Then
supervisor.
there's
CAL FIRE isn't expending any of this money. They're giving the money through either the two contracts, the 1 million and then the 2.5 million to the county to then expend to do the work.
Right, okay, got it, thank you. There's a $30,000 match. I don't see this in here anywhere. Do we not need to approve that, or is that coming from our other funds, or?
Supervisor, the $30,000 match is through in-kind staff
Okay,
from the OES staff working on this project.
Okay,
It was
great.
part of our original grant submission, the
Okay.
2.5 million portion.
okay, so the $1 million that we're getting that we have to get moving right away is going to a variety of people to help set this up, and a portion of that is going to the vegetation removal?
Supervisor, think of the $1 million is to do 300 acres of this project, turnkey. So that's going to
Okay.
direct contracts to foresters, biologists, and the Fire Safe Council.
Okay,
So that $1 million will do the full
Cover-
treatment
as
of
well
up
as
to
all the,
everything involved to
Yeah.
treat the 300 acres.
okay. And then this grant, because it's complicated, as you've been saying, then the grant, which was going from CAL FIRE, also coming to us to do contract out in the same way.
It's the exact same model,
Okay.
Supervisor. The only difference between the 1 million and the 2.5 million is that first 300 acres has some CEQA relief.
Right.
I wouldn't say it's fully CEQA
Okay.
relief, and County Council will certainly, we have many conversations about that.
Okay.
It does provide a limited amount of CEQA relief. We still have to have a biologist come in. We still have to have forester.
Okay.
Mr. Garcia referred to a RPF, that's a registered professional forester
Forester,
that will have
right.
to come in.
Okay, so that's very helpful. Thank you to just put that all in perspective. So the two concerns I have about the 300, the CEQA potentially partially exempt piece is, number one, this idea that you're going to go in and pick the properties where people are willing to do it and then call those exempt, and then somehow go in later and do a CEQA document for the rest of the 600 acres with portions cut out where residences are part of that first $1 million. Am I making sense? That doesn't make sense to me. You're going to need a CEQA document that makes sense, that covers a chunk of land without pockets taken out where it was partially exempt. Is that making sense? I mean, this is what it's sounding like you're planning to do.
It's exactly what we're planning on doing, Supervisor, and I'll refer to County Council to be more eloquent in
No,
explaining that.
I'm smiling because, yes, it's very complicated and convoluted and unusual. What the governor did is he gave a CEQA exemption and then took part of it away. So that's why we have to do these additional studies. And CAL FIRE put together a plan that they then gave to certain state agencies, specifically, I believe, Cal EPA and Natural Resources. And in that plan, they committed to doing these different studies prior to doing the work. So that's why we have to do, so it's an exemption, but yet it's not an exemption because we still have to do these biological studies. The plan is to take maximum advantage of the exemption for the first 400 acres. And then while we are working on a larger mitigated neg deck for the full 1,200 acres, the full 1,200 acre study will take into account what has already happened on sort of the patchwork quilt that you're describing. And that so it'll be a little bit of a struggle to come up with a comprehensive CEQA document, but we do believe we can do that.
And you're not concerned about the risk that we're going to say all this needs to be as a mitigated neg deck, and we've done all this mitigation, except for these portions in the middle where we, cut the corners because the governor allowed us to.
No, only because CEQA is a creature of the legislature, and so what the legislature gives, they can take back as well. So I think we will be okay. I also think the primary risk in this case is biological. It's protecting the species that are out there and the habitat that may be out there. And we will be doing that biological study for the entire, acreage before we ever start work.
Okay. And that's going to be crunch time, right? Because you're trying to get this all done in the first year. But you have to do the biological study first.
Correct, Supervisor, and that's one of the main drivers behind the emergency declaration, so we can
Right.
cut that contract ASAP.
Right, okay. And then I guess my last comment, well, maybe the last two, the idea of starting with the county land out there makes sense, except for that is exactly where we have a biologically sensitive species that we've had to work around. So I just caution that that's not one area we want to, cut corners on.
Correct, Supervisor, and we're not going to cut corners anywhere. I wouldn't phrase it as that. And we've already done a walkthrough out there with Fire Safe Council, with the Native Plant Society, and we will be doing the biological
Okay.
study. So we're very sensitive to that area, as Mr. Garcia has much experience
Yeah.
out there with us.
I think that,
And my cutting corners means, the governor's endorsed cutting of corners, so.
I just want everybody to understand how special that environment out on your land is, and what we collectively, CAL FIRE and the county, have done together to create a solid relationship and a very respected history with the Native Plant Society, showing that fuels reduction does not mean eliminating endangered species, but actually enhances and promotes those species. That the risks to those species is the fact that we've done nothing. The doing nothing is the damage to those species. And by doing something, we enhance those species, we enhance the habitats. We have more of those endangered plants on that site today as a direct result of the work that the county and CAL FIRE has done there. And the idea that there is a cutting of corners, whether it's a flippant sort of like, well, the governor says we can, we're not cutting any corners. What we are doing is saving those species by doing this work. That is the model that we've created there. If you look at all of the documents that are on our website, and you look at the prescriptions that are provided there to the Natural Resources Agency, which have been repeatedly used across the state, that came from this project. It started in 2009, went through minutia, environmental minutia, for years, right? We ended up with a project that everybody could live with. That's the model that's being used, okay? So I want you to understand that this is a very special situation. And yes, it's complicated, and yes, it's complex, but these professionals that you have can do it.
I really appreciate your understanding of that issue, and that you're, committed to doing it in a model type way. So thank you for that. My last comment would be sort of more administrative, that just concerns that we want to oversee that this money doesn't get sucked up with admin, which I know, Steve, you're going to watch over, but also we're going to be in a rush to get enough people out there to do it, and making sure that they're doing things right, and just we want to be cautious about that as well as moving forward quickly.
Absolutely, Supervisor. And the grant guidelines do have a cap on admin, so there is guardrails in place for that.
Great. Thank you very much. Sounds like an incredibly complicated project. I'm really excited to see it get started, and good luck with all the individual landowners.
It sounds incredibly complicated. Also, it sounds incredibly important. And frankly, I would hope that everyone involved sees it as being something which is incredibly satisfying with regard to its final implementation. Several questions. First is roadside veg management. The county has its own program for doing so. There are some public roads that run through this area. Should we assume that the two grants will likewise finance whatever roadside veg management has to be done within those areas, or is that coming out of county pots of revenue?
Chairman Anderson, my expectation is that would be funded by this project.
Very good. There are BLM lands, as you noted, just to the west of this project area. Is there any coordination going on with BLM with regard to vegetation management within those areas to help hopefully attain some synergy with regard to what we're doing in that 1,200 acres just to the east?
Chairman, we have had discussions with BLM, and we have talked about shifting and trying to pick up some of their land areas. That brings in a whole new process of the federal NEPA version of CEQA. And I don't know if CAL FIRE's had more discussions with that. That was the last.
We've started the conversations, and we're hopeful that BLM will come alongside. But I never really, I would not plan on any sort of expedited implementation on any BLM land.
But it's nice that there are conversations going on. That's a start. With regard to the boundary area, the red line, is that hard and fast, or given that this is sort of implementation of a shaded fuel break mosaic, if there are property owners who aren't interested in being involved, can that red line shift a little bit to bring in other properties, or is it once defined, it's set in concrete?
As I explained in a recent field meeting on site, there's a certain amount of political capital that we can expend to try and modify boundaries. I think it would just require a very specific proposal about what it is we're hoping to do, and have the Natural Resource Agency accept that proposal.
Okay.
And I certainly wouldn't commit to just haphazardly moving that red line anywhere, because it's what we've used from day one as the description of the project.
Yeah, and frankly, I think that the property owners, once they realize that this is a state willing to finance tree removal, vegetation removal on their lands, hopefully they'll recognize, you know, as someone who lives in the forest, I know how much money it costs to take a tree out. And hopefully they'll recognize that what that would cost them if they needed to do it themselves, and what the benefits are to their property, to their homes, to have the state do it for them rather than having to pay for it themselves. I mean, to me, this is an incredible gift to a lot of property owners, but it benefits a much broader area also with regard to fire protection. So, so ideally, we'll have high participation by the landowners within this area. But there's always a chance that there may be some who just say, forget it. I like how my property is vegetated. I don't want to do anything. Go away, please. And other than, you know, applying 4291 or 4290, there might need to be a conversation down the road about modifying the boundary in order to ensure that we have an adequate fuel break. But the question was, is it modifiable? Your answer is possibly, but it will take some effort to make it to do so. And my takeaway is that it just clarifies that we need to focus strongly upon the people within this area to get them to buy into the project and participate.
I really like the thought, though, where, you know, you have, say, 20 acres of parcels that don't want to participate and opt out on it, you know, and so now we've got less, but I think the problem would come in with CEQA as far as modifying those boundaries. We'd have to do an amendment if we do a mitigated negative deck, I would think. But Richard, I really like the thought.
Okay, well, thanks, Dan. And that's it for my questions. Is it Chief Garcia or Mr. Garcia? I'm not quite sure what your title is. So.
It depends on who you ask.
Okay. I mean, I've heard both being used this morning, and I want to make sure we get it right when we talk with you.
I'm the unit forester for CAL FIRE's Nevada Yuba Placer unit, and am one of the division chiefs on the executive staff working for Chief Estes.
So we are correct to call you Chief?
Sure.
As well as Mr.
That certainly wouldn't be an offense to me.
Well, thank you for coming here. It's been most edifying, and also the same for Chief Matthias. It's you know, we've had you talk with us before, and both of you, and we're very happy to have you involved in this unit and participating in this project. So
that's my pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, and Joey also. Fire Safe Council.
Jamie.
Joey.
I answered anything. It's okay.
Blame Ed. Thank you, Jamie. So with that, let's open this to public comment. Is there any final questions from my colleagues? No final questions?
No really questions. I think though, we have to look at this at a common sense issue too. I mean, I think this is important. I do like what you guys, how you do work through CEQA, but I can guarantee if it burns, all those are gonna be gone. So we need to use some realistic type thinking as we do these projects. I think you guys do a great job. I think what you've worked out there, let's keep developing the invasive species. I'm going to call some of them invasive as they do that, but it is important what you're doing. And the program, and if you do go online, it's really interesting to look at your CAL FIRE website that talks about all those things. So I'm about, let's save it before it doesn't burn, because then we won't have those species there.
Thank you, Sue. So, gentlemen, thanks very much. Let's open these 2 seats to the public. And for those from the public who'd like to speak, please give us your name, and you have 3 minutes.
Matthew Coulter, Nevada County. This being the first project of its kind, it's kind of a model project, an example project, so I hope that it can be done so other people just want to really jump on board with it, because it's almost like winning the lottery if you're a landowner to have this clearing done for free, because it is so expensive to have done. I'm concerned about the absentee landowners, which there are so many of them now in the county, and putting the fee onto their tax rolls if they do deny getting involved with the program, because we do have some really priority places that have just, they're 10 times overgrown what their neighbors are on either side, as well as the homeless zones. The BLM land there is kind of been a problem for the county for years. I mean, we've even had 2 young ladies' bodies dumped out there. Constantly people shooting out there, having bonfires, lighting cars on fire. It's just like, you know, because they know that's BLM and it's out there. So it's kind of a, and I did want to correct myself, and that's South Ponderosa in the purple, not the French Creek. The French Creek is just below that. I live down there on the creek. And another problem you're going to have in that drainage right there is, unfortunately, there's a lot of pot farms. So when you go in there, you're going to run into a lot of gates and dogs and people that are probably not going to be real receptive to having you even come on the property, let alone want to destroy their green shield they have to hide what they're doing. So I definitely take that into consideration, and maybe even do an overflight through that along the creek there, and I think you'll see a lot of greenhouses, and even right butted up against the BLM property, there's farms going on right now that are way out of compliance. So that's just another aspect, I think, of what you're going to run into in this swath there. But it's a great place to start. But I'm just concerned about the BLM land and the embers just basically jumping over that beautifully cleared swath and just going right into town, because the feds won't take care of their property. And I know BLM's been giving things up from time to time. Maybe somehow we could wrangle it away from them so we could care for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Coulter.
Hi, Linda Chaplin. It sounds like this is a complicated project. I do not live in this zone, but I am aware of the history of the Ponderosa Road. The creation goes back quite a ways. I don't know, back into the 30s or 40s, my recollection is, and it was it actually runs along the Western Sierra foothills. It was, I believe it was designed originally as a fire break. I don't know whether any road easements are still active with this road. A few decades ago, I did walk once the section down where the former Bitney Springs Grass Valley Group property was located. At the time, that road, I don't consider it passable by vehicles. I think it even had a gate across it. So I'm not sure if this is going to be an active accessible fire break. I don't know if that's going to include road reconstruction. No idea how the county or fire agencies are going to access the road once the fire break is in place. I also wanted to make a comment that I wish during the presentation the map had actually been oriented properly, and because several people refer to it, then it would be off to the west. When you're doing a presentation, put your map in right. Show us where north is so that when you refer to cardinal points, we're not guessing. That's my comment on that. Looking at the map, it looks like this is an area that's completely private property. Yikes. My recent experience working with PG&E on dedicated line easements, that already was a slow go. Not everybody was excited about having vegetation removed on their property. And my experience also from the recent PG&E project is vegetation management is very labor intensive, slow. It takes a while to do it. And then you also have to figure out where you're going to put all the cut stuff. And as we can see on Banner Mountain, tree trunks are still lying around waiting to be taken care of. So this looks like a project that could take quite a while to get done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chaplin. Any additional public comment? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and move into final discussion and a motion and a vote. So any final points to make or questions to raise or arguments to make?
I just think this is a great area to start, as far as fire protection for our area.
Thanks, Dan. Would someone care to make a motion?
So moved.
Well, actually, we're
do one at a time?
doing three,
say.
three resolutions. So the first one, so keep that thought in mind, please, Sue.
I will.
SR 19-0652, resolution proclaiming a local emergency in Nevada County due to the identification of extremely dangerous fire risk conditions in an area of Nevada County designated by the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection as the Ponderosa West project area. Motion, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Sue.
Second.
Madam Clerk.
District 2?
Yes.
District 4?
Yes.
District 3?
Yes.
District 1?
Yes.
District 5?
Yes. Second resolution, SR 19-0646, which is a resolution approving a contract between the County of Nevada and CAL FIRE for the Ponderosa West Grass Valley Defense Zone project in the amount of $1 million for the period July 9th, 2019 through December 31st, 2020. Do we have a motion?
Yep, second.
So Dan, motion by Dan, second by Sue. Madam Clerk.
District 2?
Yes.
District 4?
Yes.
District 3?
Yes.
District 1?
Yes.
District 5?
Yes. And finally, resolution SR 19-0651, a resolution accepting a grant from CAL FIRE in the amount of $2,536,477 for the Ponderosa West Grass Valley Defense Zone project for the period July 9th, 2019 through March 15th, 2022.
So moved.
Second.
Madam Clerk.
District 2?
Yes.
District 4?
Yes.
District 3?
Yes.
District 1?
Yes.
District 5?
Yes. Thanks very much. Steve and David, thank you for your presentations. Thank you to CAL FIRE staff and to Fire Safe Council staff.